Welcome to Interviews, the show about everyday people with extraordinary stories. I'm your host, Abigail Mankey. My guest today is Keith Cunningham. While you may not know his name, you have likely heard of Rich Dad from the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Keith is Rich Dad in the sense that the wealth ideas presented in the book are based on a personal finance course that Keith wrote for Kiyosaki. Keith helped to create one of the largest cable TV companies in the United States in the 70s and 80s. In 1983, though, he turned his attention to real estate, building a huge portfolio, but when the bottom fell out just 3 years later, it crushed him financially, as he had personally guaranteed over $100 million in debt. Keith, welcome to Interviews.
Thank you, Abigail. Glad to be here.
So give us an idea of how big your portfolio was at its peak.
Well, I had well over $100 million of real estate. I had well over $100 million of personal liability debt. When you start letting your ego and emotions run your business and investing decisions, it's usually a prescription for disaster, and that's what happened to me.
You spent several years trying to pay everyone back, and ultimately you had to file bankruptcy. How did you feel? That must have been a really cruddy time.
It was the worst possible time of my life. Looking back on it today, it's the best thing that could have ever happened to me.
Keith, you took an 18-month sabbatical after your bankruptcy. What did you do during those 18 months?
I didn't know that it was a sabbatical. I didn't know that it was going to last 18 months. All I knew is that I was in severe pain. But at one point, I started looking for a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Really? You considered suicide?
I did. And I went and stood at the intersection of Mopac and Bee Cave Road from 7 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night. I had a little sign and a little tin cup, and the sign said, "Played my cards wrong."
Did you run into people that...
Absolutely. All day long, my friends are going past me, honking their horn and waving, and they're laughing. My job for 18 months was to rebuild Keith.
Keith, tell us what you're doing now.
Well, today we own, Sandy and I, my wife and I, own a small little handful of businesses.
So what is your net worth?
It's enough so that I don't need to work.
What are one or two just nuggets of wisdom that you could convey to people who are listening, entrepreneurs, to benefit from what you've learned?
All my problems started out as a good idea. Having a coach, having an advisor, having somebody around me to watch me swing is critical, because otherwise I wind up executing on lots of good ideas that ultimately wind up becoming economic disasters.